I noticed actually, like, if you look at the speakers, they're all men, and I'm like the only woman. So a lot of people really like me. I mean, a lot of people there are like, gone.
No, I was going to say that's a really interesting point because I'm kind of going based off a lot of what you've heard, what you've said, sorry, as well, what I've heard, and the fact that there is equal opportunity, right, in Speaker's Corner. I don't think anyone would argue against that. And naturally, as
Yeah.
you said, it is more men.
Oh yeah.
So it's not forced. It's like they've got equal opportunity, and then naturally there seems to be a proclivity of, more of a proclivity for men to go and do this kind of. Often it's aggressive as well, debating on maybe I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe women aren't generally, as interested, maybe, or a bit put off by it. I don't know. That's just me thinking out loud. Yeah.
Well, no, it's funny because earlier today I was actually talking with someone about this when I was talking, and I was saying about how men are more typically driven to do like certain professions, and men are more typically like more ambitious, and women are typically more agreeable. And I think the problem is that, as you
Mm.
said, like people don't understand like there's equal opportunities and equality of opportunity is important, but that doesn't necessitate equality of outcome. And
Yeah.
what these feminists want is they want equality of outcome. They want everything to
Mm.
be 50-50, but that's not realistic. It's like, realistically speaking, certain things are much more male centric and certain things are much more female centric. I mean, there's going to be certain situations, for example, more women than men want to be around children and be nurses.
Yeah.
It
Right.
doesn't
Like
negate
teaching and
male
stuff. Yeah.
nurses. Yeah, that doesn't negate male nurses. It just so happens that this is a much more female oriented thing. I mean,
Mm.
what I really fail to understand is why people view this as a problem. I think it's really, really cringe. Like, why, like, not people, but why feminists and these kind of extreme
I don't think it's
leftists.
just feminists though. Actually, it's generally. I mean, I hear this often. It's a tricky subject, but you did quote Jordan Peterson, and I like him quite a lot. I'm a bit disheartened by some of maybe his political moves as of recent, but you know, I'm not qualified. I don't feel knowledgeable enough to comment on those. But he does speak a lot, as you mentioned in the video today that you did at Speaker's Corner, about the equality. As you outlined there, equal opportunity, equality of sorry, outcome, and so on. It is a strange thing to force. Yeah. Sorry, I've rambled a lot. And
Yeah.
if you
So are
guys are
we gonna
watching
do
on
like a little
YouTube, yeah, 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 yeah,
introductory thing?
yeah, of course. Yeah,
No, this
sorry.
is kind of nice though. It's like, I like how you and I just sort of like clicked like right away. Like,
Well,
even
as I say, I've watched or was listening to. I've just been so rushed this week. Honestly, it's yeah. I'll have to apologize again for being late. I'm really last minute. But I've been listening to a reasonable amount of your stuff, I would say, recently, just specifically because I knew this video was coming up, and so I don't want it to be a debate. And typically, what I've done, as I mentioned with the brother in Syria, they're just conversations, almost like an interview type thing. I'm not really pushing back, but here I feel like I feel I'd like to have a sort of in between, which may have hopefully come across in the emails. Not a debate. I don't wish to.
more of a
I
discussion.
don't.
No, I
Yeah, yeah,
prefer that.
exactly.
Yeah,
Like
I
I disagree. I
prefer
just
that. I mean,
yeah.
yeah, I think debates are good. I do
It
prefer
becomes
discussions to debates,
arguing for the
really.
sake of arguing.
Well, exactly. I mean,
Yeah,
like that's the problem as well. Like, because I'll like for example, if say I'm talking to someone who's a feminist,
yeah, yeah. Mm.
I'll basically explain to them why they're wrong about everything. But what I do is I listen to their things and then just counter it based on what they say. But
Mm.
also try and get into, because I was doing that a lot today actually. I'm gonna start filming more as well myself as like the more I go there, because I had a really good chat. I should have filmed it, but it was me talking to this girl, this like 13-year-old girl, and she was very, very intelligent. And she kept
Quite young,
firing
that.
things at me. Yeah, she
Yeah.
kept asking questions, and I kept retaliating, not retaliating, but I kept answering her. And I realized what was actually happening is the more you do that, the more you get better at sharpening your arguments, because it's one
Mm.
thing for me to be in my bedroom researching feminism, making videos, blah 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 blah, but to actually go out in public and really, really start to like properly do this thing, because it's something I obviously feel very strongly about. It's something which
Yeah,
I think is a
that comes
big
across. Yeah.
social problem. Well, it's a big social problem, and I think it's important as well as a young woman who is very like well read with the subject. And I'm
Mm.
not coming from a conservative position, a leftist position. I'm just coming from this is a thing, I know it, here we go. And I always emphasize that as well. Like whenever I'm doing a speaker's corner, I'm always saying, like, you know, um, women can be powerful. I'm not against women having careers. I'm not against women doing anything. Women can do whatever we want. I remember some women were saying to me, "Oh, you're saying women can do everything we want, but that women should be housewives." I kept saying no. I wasn't saying women should be wives and
Yeah,
mothers.
you
I'm
weren't. Yeah,
saying
yeah, I heard
most
that.
women want to be wives and mothers.
Right.
That,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that's what pisses me off as well when people accuse me of saying things I haven't said when they take what I've said out of context.
Yeah.
I can't stand that.
Because they're
And
not always listening.
no, well,
They
they're
hear
hearing their
something and
interpretation
then
of it. Yeah.
they'll hear, I think, the first few sentences that any individual says, and then I think I don't know if I can say the average person, but what tends to happen here and there anyway is they'll, as I say, yeah, they'll hear a few sentences and then they think they know exactly what you're going to say, and then their response is sometimes emotional as well because we're emotional beings. Is to an argument that you weren't about to make and you continue then not to make necessarily, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if you'd find that to be the case at times.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it hasn't actually, to tell you the truth, most of the people at Speaker's Corner who listen to me, most of them just clap. Like, I see a lot of men as well watching, and I can just see them like going, yes. Like one guy today, actually, when I was sat, because I'm holding a sign saying feminism is trash. And the guy just looked at me and his jaw dropped, and he was just like going, oh my God, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And he just came, and I was like, yeah, he looks like he had this look of relief because I do see like a lot of women, of course, a lot of women actually very supportive. Like one woman today, I remember she saw my son, she was like, yes, feminism is trash, but there's a lot of men, and I can really see that. I can really see. Sorry, before I continue, did you want to do an introduction thing? Or
Yeah, I was just yeah,
yeah.
I was just waiting for you to finish that point. Go on, finish
Well,
the point.
yeah. There's a lot of men. I'd like to excuse my hay fever. I think because I was out in the
No, it's
park all
okay. Don't
day,
worry.
it's
Yeah.
just really hit me badly. But yeah, no, a lot of men, I can really see them just looking so like, oh my God, it's thank heavens, there's a woman saying everything I'm thinking because I know men are so afraid. And I've obviously had lots of guys, say to me in my life, like, it's so hard. We can't say this. If we say this, they shut us down. Even men who might even be more sympathetic to feminism, there's still this sense of like, um, and just to see a female who's actually just blatantly having at it going, no, feminism is trash, you're not misogynist, men are not pigs, men are good people. I can just see the men just looking at me like, oh my God, and they're just so relieved. And that, for me, that really is important. And that, for me, really warms my heart.
Oh, it's
So
good.
that really does
But
matter to me a lot.
yeah, no, it's good to feel that almost gives you a brings meaning and purpose to what you're doing. You know, which arguably is maybe one of the best feelings you can have. Okay, so yeah, in terms of an intro, then, so sorry if I do look down to the people watching and yourself, not trying to be rude. I did sort of summarize a few notes based on a bit of an email back and forth that we had about topics. So yeah, so we'll just start off if you've slightly gone into some of it, but just if you don't mind giving us a bit of your background personally, where you're from, where your family's from, dynamics, sort of personal beliefs and whatnot. If you can give us an overview, that would be interesting.
Yes, so I'm of Indian and Tanzanian descent, and I was not raised in any kind of religious background. I currently identify as a pantheist, who is someone who believes that basically all is kind of one with God in the universe. I don't really believe in a one God in a kind of theistical sense. I more kind of just believe that everything is interconnected, that we're all part of everything. It's quite a complex thing to explain, but I think it is. I mean, to me, God is really just a word. I feel like it is very much a placeholder term for like anything which is kind of greater than us that we cannot see. So, the sun, the stars, the moon, the universe, for me, it's all really just part of that greater divine energy. And as for what I genuinely politically, I wouldn't say I'm of any political denomination. I say my beliefs politically align closely with classical liberalism, but I no longer subscribe to liberal. Like I used to say I was a liberal, but I don't like saying that anymore. But I still say I generally hold overall more classically liberal ideals, but even though I don't like to describe myself as a classical liberal. And I'd say I'm very much humanitarian and for human rights. I just believe in rights for people, really. I just believe in humanitarian rights, and we should be fighting for humans. We should be fighting for, caring about people, caring about people's rights to speak, rights to be heard, rights to live and be treated fairly. And yeah, that's kind of a good overview of what I really believe, really.
Yeah, so sorry, and if it's too personal, feel free. We can cut things out as well. It's the beauty of not being live. You mentioned your father was Muslim, did you?
Hmm. Yeah.
So do you mind
No, that's
explaining that
fine.
if you don't mind? Yeah.
Yes, my father was raised Christian, and again, neither he nor my mother are strictly practicingly religious, but my dad did convert. I think it was about a year and a half ago. Yeah, he converted to
Well,
Islam.
it's
He
not
said
long
for
ago at
him,
all.
no, it wasn't long ago. I
Yeah.
mean, for me, it was a bit of a shock initially, but he explained it to me, and the way I see it, the way he practices, for him, he said it just gives him a lot of peace. Like he goes to mosque and he prays, and for him, he just said it just gives him a lot of peace and clarity. And the way he's explained to me, I feel like that's what I would describe as, say, you could say the good side of, not sure the good side of Islam, but the good side of following a religion, of kind of just having that sense of peace, being connected to that which is greater than yourself, praying, being around people who are also in that. He's not fundamentalistic or dogmatic at all. It's not his personality. He's never been like that. And nor has he ever tried to impose anything onto me. And he's actually made me even a bit more open-minded to it, because even though there's certain things about, no, if it's not really Islam per se, but the Abrahamic religions in general I disagree with, I do see the good side in it, and I like to hope for the long term I'd like to be more neutral about all of it, really. And I think that, yeah, I would like to have more of a neutral approach to it all, really, long term, because at the end of the day, it should be more about people's spiritual connection, as opposed to I'm telling you to think in this way and all this dogma kind of thing.
What is your sort of educational background?
So I studied at the Academy of Contemporary Music, and I did a
Okay.
degree in songwriting and creative artistry. So basically, music performance based degree.
And sorry, you did you say you were 26?
I'm turning 26 in next week, actually.
Okay, same as me then. I'm
Yeah.
25, yeah. And just sort of lastly to wrap up the sort of personal side, how have your sort of quite a general question, so I do apologize for that. But your general sort of beliefs and so on, how have they changed over the last few years specifically? I'm curious. Meaning, let me just explain that a bit further because a lot of what you said and we'll go into as well, you've obviously thought a lot about this stuff and read or researched or watched a lot of content. I would say you have quite strong views. I don't mean that in an offensive way, but it's good to be, fairly sure of what you're saying. So where's that come from? What's the influence?
Well, I definitely think that the more confident you become in yourself, the easier it is to retain a level of assertion in what you think and believe. And the more that we grow as people, the more it becomes easier. And there were definitely, like, say, a good 2, 3 years ago, I would more say things like, oh, in my opinion, feminism is this, or I think that feminism is that. And now I've noticed myself saying, well, no, it actually isn't my opinion. I'm describing what it actually is, allowing to discern the difference between fact and opinion. So, for example, of it, I can say, oh, in my opinion, feminism is trash, but it's a fact that feminism is not about equal rights. It's about specifically liberating women from patriarchal oppression, and it's rooted in Marxism. And because I've studied this enough, I know that that is what feminism actually is. That specifically, patriarchy theory is a big part of feminism. So, yeah, I can say, in my opinion, well, that's trash because it's not objectively trash. It's not really objectively good or bad. You can say the effects of it are negative, but then obviously feminists would argue the effects are positive because it fits in line with their view of the world. And also, just kind of the more that I've seen a lot of these, say, feminists or cultural Marxists or these kind of extreme woke leftists, the more I've seen them grow and grow in their kind of assuredness and antagonism, the more it's almost made me feel like I have to be much, much more sure of myself to really counter that. Because I think that if I'm going to counter that, and me and people who might think like myself, we can't just be all soft and be all like, well, because actually that's not going to get us anywhere. And we mentioned Dr. Peterson earlier. I don't know what happened with him recently, so you can tell me more about that later. But
It's just his visits to
I love the fact that he is
via
so.
Israel and whatever. Yeah.
Oh yeah, let me know about that bit because that'd be quite interesting. But yeah, Dr. Peterson, I love how he is so self-assured and he's just so direct. And for me, I love that about him. I mean, he's inspired so many people. Like it's
Yeah, yeah.
brilliant, really. Like I don't know anyone. Like honestly, most people love him. Like there's a few people. Like I know some guy who said he's like a white supremacist. I don't know where they get the ideas from, but no,
Mm.
I love that there's people out there like him. Like I love that he exists, and I love the idea of being somebody like that as well, who could be someone who is very, very direct. Like I love the idea of being someone who people can look to as someone who is sure of herself, who is not taking any bullshit, who is going for it. Because if you want to be a force for good in the world, you have to believe in yourself, and you can't just be all scared and nervous. It's like, what do I have to be scared and nervous about? I have the research. I'm well read. I'm a bloody
Can I
published
push
author.
back?
Like,
You
you
could
know,
be scared and nervous about your ego, sort of pushing you beyond maybe logic or truth, if you follow what I mean by that. As in being sure of your. I'm not saying this is the case for you, but even myself, I ask, sometimes if I'm making a certain point, am I making it? Am I really being sure of it? And am I sometimes overarching the argument because I want to be sure of myself and right when I'm not? I've not fully understood something, you know.
yeah, well, that's why I guess maybe there's the whole thing of like if you are sure in what you are saying. So, for example, I know I'm sure about feminism because I've researched it a lot.
Mm,
Whereas if I'm talking about, well, Islam, for example, I might not be as sure just because I'm not as 100% familiar with it. Whereas if I know, because it's because I've done a lot of research into feminism, and I've something which I've been interested in for years. So I think that's why I'm very, very strong with it as well.
mm,
Maybe there's something to be said for like making sure a person really knows what they're saying as well. Because I think a lot of people, maybe they falter because they say something and then they don't really know what they're talking about. But if you know something very well, like I can talk a lot about self-publishing, I can talk a lot about feminism, I can talk a lot about certain things because I know them well.
yeah.
But it's much harder to talk about something you don't know that well. That makes
Right,
sense.
yeah, no, that's fair. So we will touch on just lightly. I'll say lightly, we'll see how it goes. But the whole Ali Dawah thing, I mentioned it more so earlier on. We did plan this a few weeks ago, I think, this video, but you have commented on it, I think, quite a few times, so I don't want to bore you with it. And also, I don't want to talk about it for the sake of it. But can you just for the viewers give a rough outline of sort of what happened and what went down? Because I watched both videos, and that's actually what the first time I saw you really, and I disagreed with a lot of what you were saying as well, in all honesty. But if you could give us an outline of what happened and how it went for you and whatnot.
Yeah, so effectively, it was my second week at being at Hyde Park Speakers Corner. And I'd just given this, like earlier that day, given this long, big speech all about feminism and Street Might Film Me. And I was all cheering and being all like, very hyper and stuff. And then I remember walking around, and then this man approached me. He said, "Oh, excuse me, can I interview you for my YouTube channel?" And just earlier that day, actually, another nice young man, he hasn't, I don't know if he's uploaded it, but this other nice young man interviewed me for his YouTube channel. And he was asking me about feminism, and I was in very good spirits. So I was thinking, oh, nice. So this guy's interviewing me. So yeah, I had no idea who Ali Dawah was. He just came and said he wanted to talk to me for his channel. I could see he had cameras, and there are people pointing to him and saying, "Oh, he's famous," and they're all saying he's a big guy. So I was like, "Oh, how many subscribers do you have?" Out of curiosity, and he said 1 million subscribers, and I was like, "Wow!" And I was really shocked. I was like, "Oh, this is so cool! This really, really like
Yeah, just
famous
one
guy
second.
wants."
Sorry, I'm sorry. I don't want to be rude because this is interesting here. Kind of, if you're into the drama, maybe. But he said it doesn't. He said at that point it doesn't matter, like maybe a few times, and that you were eager to ask. Whereas you said he just immediately kind of said it. If you can't remember, you can't remember. Maybe he can't. I'm just
Sorry?
curious, like, because sorry, did you miss what I said there? Have I
Yeah,
lost you? Yeah, so I've listened to both sides, yeah, and I feel like a bit of a drama queen asking this question, but I am just
that's fine.
curious. When you mentioned you asked him how many subscribers, he said, sorry, when you asked
He
him,
had, yeah.
he said 1 million.
Yeah.
Was that his first response?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he said
Because
1 million subscribers.
in his account, he said something along the lines of it doesn't matter,
Oh,
maybe
oh
once
yeah,
or
no, he
twice.
does say that. Well, the thing is, he's
Did he say that in this instance? Just for
um,
clarity.
yeah, no, I
Sorry,
think
I
no,
know
I
it's a
think he said
very
no, it's fine. No, I think he said 1 million. I mean, the thing is, I'm gonna touch on this as well. I'm really sorry to say this as well. I do have to be a bit blunt. He is a very well, the way it came
go
across
for
to
it.
me, he's very well, I'm gonna say he's very manipulative. I
Okay.
think that's just his personality as well. That really came across to me. But it's his style. I understand that he's a businessman, but the thing is I can kind of see through him. But so he said, what do you call it? Yeah, I said to him, "Oh yeah, how many subscribers do you have?" And he was like 1 million subscribers. He said it's not a big deal. And I remember at
Oh,
the time
okay.
thinking, oh, he was very humble, but then I realized, oh no, he was
Oh,
actually
right.
doing
You did.
something known as humble bragging, which is when
Right,
someone,
right. Yeah.
because he kept on saying to me, oh, I'm no one, I'm no one, I'm nothing, I'm nobody. And I interpreted that as, oh, he's humble. And then I realized, no, he's actually doing a
Mm,
tactic known as humble bragging, which is
right.
actually quite common with people who have very narcissistic traits. They tend to downplay, it's like they tend to make themselves come across as very humble when they're
Mm.
actually not necessarily. So yeah, so what happened was, I mean, I'll explain the manipulation thing as well.
Sure, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
because what it is that so he effectively, yeah, he told me he had a big following, and I was very, very excited. And I was thinking, oh, he's invited me on his channel because he wants to talk to me. And then he started off asking me about feminism. And I started talking about feminism, being very, and I was thinking, oh, this is so cool. And then he started bringing up Islam. And I kept on saying a few times, I said, oh, sir, I'm not comfortable talking about Islam, but he kept on going. And the reason why I wasn't comfortable talking about it was
Mm.
specifically because um, I do have a bit of knowledge on it, but I don't know enough about it to talk about it. And the views that I have on it are not necessarily the best kind of views. And it's not really, as I said, it's not like I
Wait, when
dislike the
you say
whole
the
of
best,
Islam.
sorry, I probably one, I tend to butt in, so I do
It's fine.
apologize for that. I don't mean to be rude. Two, if I disagree, I'd rather not just jump, or if I have a question, I'd rather not just miss it.
Yeah.
So you said actually here that you have um, sort of bad views or something about Islam. Sorry, can you repeat the last few sentences? You said something
Well,
that I
it's
don't think
more,
reflects well what you're thinking, having listened to more of your content.
yeah, well, I'd say it's more that I dislike certain things. So, for example, Sharia law,
Yeah, yeah, which we'll go
um,
into somewhat. Yeah,
yeah, or things like we'll say it's more like Islamic fundamentalism. I would
right.
say I have an issue with. As I said earlier, I think there's a good way to discern the difference between spiritual Islam and then the political thing of Islam.
Mm,
Actually, a girl who watches my channel who was at the park earlier today
mm,
said to me that most countries are not even following Islam properly. That
mm.
actually is people's interpretation of it, which I
Ali
found
Dawah would say that to you as
kind of
well.
interesting.
I don't know
Sorry?
him, but I said Ali Dawah would say that to you as well. I don't know him, but I know he'd say that. Make agree with that
Well, the way
statement.
I see him is he's a fundamentalist because he mentioned in passing, he said, I'd like it if personally if England became Sharia. And I've heard
I have to
somebody say
disagree
that he
with you
supports.
to be honest on that.
Okay.
I don't think that makes you. I mean, you have your own beliefs, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, the thing
Yeah.
is, the issue that I was effectively trying to bring up is that effectively, what I was trying to get at is simply because the UK is the UK
Mm,
and the values of the UK should remain for UK based. And
yeah.
regarding Islam, I say the same with, say, I don't know, Hinduism.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it would be the same kind of thing with any kind of other belief system, really, whether it was Islam, Hinduism, Sikhism. I would say, this country is the country of the English, and it should be respected, and we shouldn't have an external belief system become the majority. That was really what I was getting at. So that was when also when we were doing the discussion, and because the thing is, I was getting very uncomfortable because what I could see was that Ali was actually trying to manipulate the conversation, and he was doing it very well. And the reason why I got very uncomfortable was because I could see that there was this clash and I didn't really want to engage it. So that's when I obviously made a statement saying, oh, so I'd rather hang myself than be a Muslim. And I said it obviously in a very off-color statement, but what it was effectively trying to get at was that many people in the UK simply don't want Islam to become the majority religion. It's not necessarily a hatred of Muslims. It's
Yeah,
simply that we don't want Islam to be the majority religion. And what I was effectively
yeah,
trying to get at was that I think that in countries where there's already an Islamic majority, that's
mm,
fine, but in the UK specifically I don't think it's right, because
yeah,
if that makes sense.
yeah. But if Islam became the majority, democratically speaking, if Muslims became 51% and we voted a Ali Dawah in to enforce Sharia, would you take any issue with that?
Well, I think that would be very troublesome because it's effectively the
Would you think there's an issue with
erasure.
it in terms
Well,
of,
yeah, I do think there's an issue because again it's sort of the erasure of the native UK British values and British ideals,
mm,
rather than say respecting the values of the country of the United Kingdom. It's sort of trying to bring about another ideology and making that become the
yeah,
majority.
yeah, but I have to disagree there because at this point, 51% of, in this hypothetical, 51% of Britain is now Muslim, right? Which I don't know that will ever happen, to be honest. But just for the sake of argument, right? Because you spoke about imposing Islamic views and bringing them here on English people. Well, if 51% of English people were Muslim and they democratically, by democracy, Western democracy, voted someone in to enforce laws that they were for, it's what those people who are English have now changed themselves. So I don't see how you can argue against that from your principles, if you will. Oh, sorry if I sound rude, by the way. I'm just thinking what it's just a response that comes to mind based on what you're saying.
No, I understand, and it's not really my principles, because the thing is, again, if we look at, say, what are the current values specifically in the United Kingdom, it's a
Mm,
majority secular liberal society. And I don't think it would be right for, say, for example, if I were to go to, say, Saudi Arabia and
mm.
to then say, okay, I want to then impose, well, not impose, but bring in secular liberal values and make that the majority.
Yeah, but you
One could
know the
say, is that
irony. Sorry,
democracy,
go on.
or is it the blend, or is it the clash of two ideologies coming together?
Mm,
And that is kind of the worry that I have, really. And it's not necessarily the worry that I just have, it's the worry that I think a lot of people in the UK have. Again, it's not necessarily about saying that Muslims shouldn't be here or anything. It's more about not wanting, say, another ideology to become the majority ideology in a country. And what I just found really uncomfortable regarding Mr. Darwa was that
mm.
I don't think he was actually paying attention to that. Well, I don't think he was really interested in engaging with me per se, such as the way you're doing. I think he was
Yeah,
more just sort of wanting to sit a conversation. It was more like he was,
I know what you
and
mean.
again, I could, but also the thing is really, the thing which really was upsetting for me, it wasn't even really the Islam thing, it was the thumbnail. It was the
Yeah,
fact
I'm
that
with
he
you. I'll
create,
be
yeah,
honest. I'm with you. Yeah,
yes, it
yeah,
was really the thumbnail. It was the
yeah.
fact that instead of highlighting a discussion, he then created a thumbnail to make it seem like I was sexually attracted to him,
Mm,
which was very, 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 very helpful for me, because I then had to
yeah.
go and see a whole bunch of comments of people saying I was trash. And that is what got me. It really had little actually to do with Islam. It was more about the fact that this guy, and that's what I was saying, was that it was actually quite manipulative of him, because he sort of
Mm,
manipulated the situation to then make fun of me for
mm,
views on the internet rather than actually have a discussion, which I
mm.
found very, very uncomfortable. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I've seen some other Muslims disagree with Ali Dawa's approach, see
Such as
that.
who, do you know?
Well, there was a Muslim guy actually, I can't remember his name now, but I just saw him making a video talking about Ali Dawa. And I mean, I think that there's, because the way it seems is that Ali Dawa's content seems more about generating clickbait,
Mm,
and rather than actually just wanting to, I don't know,
It's tricky
maybe.
though because you do need the viewership. So,
Well,
like you
I mean,
mentioned
he
about
has
yourself.
1 million subscribers, doesn't he?
Yeah, yeah. But it's interesting because as he mentioned, you actually said part of you wanting to engage with him was the fact that he had X amount of viewership, wasn't it? So you
Yeah,
can see the
effectively.
benefit it brings. But just for the record, I support him as a Muslim brother, and I do like him, and I've watched him for maybe like 7, 8 years.
Yeah.
I I can't really find an excuse for the thumbnail and stuff.
Well,
He does
that's
a
what I
lot of
was saying
column
about
clickbait,
that.
and
Yeah, that
and
it was
it's
very
distasteful, to be honest with
distasteful
you.
and, you
And then
know,
you gave you had the second video, which was quite an emotional response and whatever. We can talk about that if you want. The least he could have done is just change the thumbnail. You know what I mean? Just that you don't still need that. Yeah, I can't really defend that. So I'm against that, just for the record. And I'm with you. I think it was wrong the way you were sort of treated in terms of the thumbnail and the title as well and stuff. It was quite this clickbait, right? Like how
yeah.
to make £1 million in a week. And then this clickbait where someone's going to get a lot of hate and possibly, just deeply upset, and it's potentially traumatizing to, so said individual or whatever. And it varies. People are different. Their tolerance for things are different. I don't know how I'd feel if 100,000, quarter of a million, whatever people watch something, and I was kind of ridiculed, or you know what I mean? I'm rambling on a bit, but it's not nice, is my point, especially as a
It's
Muslim.
not
It's
nice, and
it's
that's
not
really the
ethical from
thing
our
which was
standpoint, I don't
upsetting.
think.
It wasn't really about Islam or not Islam. It was the fact that somebody had come along, effectively manipulated a situation to kind of get me in a honey trap and
Mm.
then create a thumbnail that made that kind of narrative. That was really the issue. It wasn't really about Islam, feminism. It was more about that. Because he could have said, you know, Ali Dawa talks to anti-feminists. Like, he
Mm.
could have made a thumbnail. There are so many more ways he could have done it. And instead he said,
The look
look at
at
us.
me thing was not on, man. Ali, that if you ever
Well,
watched his
that
film,
was really
bro,
the thing.
that's wrong,
And
man. Come on.
well, it was wrong. And it was ironic because he went on in the video, he talks about how men shouldn't objectify women. And yet
Mm.
he effectively objectified a woman
Well, he's claiming you
for a bunch
wanted
of
to
views
be
on YouTube.
objectified, is
Well,
what
that
he's
was the
doing by the
narrative he was
thumbnail.
effectively
Yeah,
doing, yeah. So
yeah,
what I was mentioning is there was a Muslim fellow I saw who made a video actually about it, and I'll send you the video if you like,
yeah.
because he
Sure,
basically
please, yeah.
talks about it. And the video is basically said, he was saying in the video like Ali Dawa's disrespectful treatment of women. And I
Mm.
think there's a lot of Muslims as well. Like there were quite a few Muslims who said it was distasteful.
Did you
He
share
said,
this on YouTube? Your this thing.
his video.
You shared a few videos, and I thought they were a bit too far, to be honest, but I can't remember exactly what was said, so I wasn't planning on bringing them up. Is this what you're referring to? A few videos that you shared
Yeah,
on?
there was one video, yeah, where a guy was talking about this, and he was saying yeah, no, he was basically saying that he was saying that it was, unfair, that the treatment, the way it was portrayed was obviously,
Mm.
not good. And that was really the concern. Really, it was really less about, because the thing is, if he just wanted to say, oh, I want to just chat to you about Islam, and it could have just been almost very, very diplomatic, but
Yeah,
it wasn't really that at all. It was, I want to
yeah.
make fun of this Western girl because in my mind she is trash because
I
she
don't
is
think
dressed
that though. This is the thing. I don't think
inappropriately.
that's fair. I don't think that's fair. How long have you known of him, Vali Datwa? How long have you consumed his content? Or
Well, I'm just going based on the way it was portrayed. It was
I
sort
know,
of
but that's one
like,
video though, isn't it? That's like one or two videos. How long
yeah.
have you known him to think that he sees you as a Western woman who's trash?
Well, that's the
Well,
narrative he portrayed in his video. That is the narrative
I think
which came across.
yeah, he's trying to put across a point, and I don't think he's doing it well. And I
Evidently.
yeah, yeah, and I don't sit here and say that I could do a better job. Probably not. Uh, but I have to defend him in so much as saying I don't. I definitely do not believe that he sees you or any Western woman as trash. He would. I would defend him in saying that I think he would say that Western morals and ethics lead to greater harm of women is what he's trying to argue. But I think it cringes me out a bit, I'll be honest, because I think he's out of his depths with some of these conversations. And there's much better speakers who articulate it well, proper, who don't jump from point to point, and maybe he needs to go back to the drawing board on a few of these things. But I think generally speaking, I have to kind of defend him there. I don't think he views Western women like that. And also,
Yeah.
another point with videos and people making videos against him, not yourself, but others, once you've got X amount of viewership and followership, people are going to just come out with shit, for lack of a better term, as well. And as you say, you've not really watched him or known of him much, have you? So to make, you are maybe, would you agree with me in saying you may be generalizing these two sort of incidents or two videos across what you know of him and his opinions and thoughts to be? Would you agree with that statement, possibly?
Well, I'm going based on the fact again that he used a woman for clickbait on his channel instead of
Yeah,
engaging. Like, I'm aware there's another content creator named Mohammed Hijab
yeah,
who
yeah.
somebody actually brought up to me, whose
Okay,
style tends to be more much more diplomatic, and I've actually
yeah,
seen videos of him engaging with Professor Peterson,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
his
yeah.
style appears to be more, again, conversational as
Mm,
opposed to clickbaity.
yeah,
And again, Mr. Dawa does have over 1 million subscribers, so it's not
mm,
like he needs to just generate content for clickbait. Like,
mm,
he got 100,000 views like that within one day. Like, he perhaps could consider shifting his content style to see how it might appeal to more to, say, non-Muslims, how we might actually begin to understand his perspective
mm.
rather than generating clickbait. Because from my perspective, again, that is definitely how it came across, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of other people who will see that.
So there are a few
Yeah.
things that you mentioned actually in that video that I did want to touch on. I know we've kind of spent quite a bit of time in this video now, but they do link in with the sort of overall topic that I think we agreed, which was Islamic
Mm-hmm.
sort of culture versus Western culture, right?
Yeah.
So the statements were, and I don't hold you to these because I know potentially, you can clarify them or double down on them. It's up to you. So there's
Yeah.
three, right? So one was that you can have your Islamic views in your own country, far from England.
Yeah.
So can you either add to or clarify, just expand on that a bit?
Yeah, so I think the problem, as well as the way I said it, sounds very, very harsh. What I meant
Yeah.
effectively is that I believe that because, for example, if we look at, say, the United Kingdom as fundamentally a liberal secular society,
It
that is
hasn't
not
always been.
necessarily, it hasn't always been, but it
It
currently
was
is.
Christian, so it has changed since
It
then.
was Christian, but right now, it's
Yeah.
specifically for the last, say, 20 years, it's been a liberal secular
Yeah.
society. Or even if it was, say, a Christian society, that is incompatible with Islamic views. I mean, if we just look at the Christian versus the Islam, that in
Mm.
itself is obviously, there's a big cultural clash there. Because even if we just look at, say, Hyde Park and Speaker's Corner, I'm just gonna
Yeah.
put the light on because it's getting a bit dark.
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, go. Oh, you know what? I'll do the same actually. It's a good shout, that, isn't it? Oh, shit, it's already. Well, it's already on, man. It's just dim.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
effectively what I meant by that was not, I don't mean any kind of disdain towards Muslims. What I meant is that
Mm.
really I believe that for societies to have, say, stability, cohesion is a good idea. And I think that genuinely a lot of Muslims would be much happier practicing Islam in a cohesive society. And likewise, Christians would be much happier practicing Christianity in a cohesive society. And people who have secular liberal values would be much happier practicing those values in a cohesive society.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
really what I meant. It wasn't necessarily about Muslims go back to your country
Mm.
as a
I'm
effectively
not
that.
inferring that.
I think that, no, I know you're not at all, but I think it's important to let that know because that's how it came across and it's quite sad. But the problem is really that I view a lot of these contemporary culture wars as being about clashes of cultures. And when you have clashes of cultures, you
Mm.
effectively end up with these big divisions. So, for example, if, say, in the modern West, it's considered acceptable for women to walk around wearing a dress, if,
Mm.
say, a Muslim fellow like Ali Dawa perceives that as, say, being improper behavior, that is then going to lead to a cultural clash.
Yeah.
And the way I see it is instead of having you're bad, it's you have your way in your society and I have my way in my society. And
Mm,
that way we can appreciate each other's cultures without two people hating each other. That's really what I
yeah.
was trying to work on a point across. And I do think that it's quite sad because I remember I feel the same way, with a lot of this stuff like the trans, the LGBT thing. Like,
Mm,
I think that a lot of these kind of gender confused people would
mm,
be much happier if they could have like a little, island where they could all live together because it doesn't work when you have all of these different values that are trying
yeah.
to clash when they are, well, especially say the United Kingdom, where there are so many different ideas
Yeah.
and people are just not getting along. And I actually think that this is like an issue of things like multiculturalism, of saying, oh, we can all just have different cultures. It's like, well, we can have different cultures, but not if they're clashing. So, for example, if you have, say, I don't know, a country where different cultures can all accept each other without trying to take over, great. But if not, it's just not going to work. And that's really what I meant,
Yeah.
Gorilla.
But here's the issue with what you're saying. There's two things. One, I think it's disrespectful to some extent. I know this isn't, I presume this wasn't intended. And as I say, I don't want to go massively into this, but if you look at the state of most of the Middle East or Muslim countries, I mean, my family is predominantly from Pakistan slash India, whatnot, colonialism and whatever happened there. Unfortunately, it's due to the history of the country that I'm in that I'm here basically. I'm not here off my own free will. My great granddad fought for this country in the World War, the Second World War. His dad fought for this country in the First World War. We don't have to go into it massively. I know you mentioned you've got part Indian heritage. These countries, I don't know if you'd contest this point, were looted to some or abused. Let's just use the word abused, right? And they're not in a state which at the time was feasible to go back or whatever happened. But it's almost like you've had something taken from you, and then you're getting a slap in the face for not having it. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we could say the similar things about even the UK, how Christianity was really used by the Romans to
Yeah,
conquer the UK and how it was used to destroy a lot of the old English paganistic beliefs. But
yeah.
I guess the issue with that is it's like, well, are we going to start blaming people's ancestors for the state of the modern
I'm not here to
day? You
blame.
know what I mean?
Just to be clear, I'm not blaming, but what I'm saying
Yeah, of
is
course.
you have to be aware of these things because the second sort of point I was going to make is you're talking about them as if it's a feasible thing, something that Muslims are just going to in mass leave the Western, Western hemisphere or whatever. It's not realistic. It's not going to happen. Me as an individual, it's not really. I mean, your dad, just to make things a bit personal and real, right? Would you expect him? Not expect him was too strict a word. Do you follow where I'm going with this? Would you think he'd be better off relocating his entire life somewhere in Saudi
Well,
Arabia of all
I
places?
definitely do think that he'd probably
Yeah.
be much happier living around other practicing Muslims. And that's really over a point. It's
Is it
less about,
practical though? Is it possible,
I think
do you think?
so. I mean, wouldn't you personally feel much happier and more positive being around other people who share your values? You know what I mean? Like, wouldn't you feel
Yeah,
that
but
that
it's
would be much
it's
more positive?
right. It's
Yeah,
it's
that's
it's
really the
quite
place I'm
a
coming from. More
yeah,
like
yeah,
you
and
could
I
say it's a bit
appreciate that.
idealistic, but it's generally
Exactly,
coming
yeah.
from an idea of it's coming from more of a place of I'm looking at these clashes and thinking,
Mm.
would it be actually more positive for people who have shared values? I mean, that's why we have countries, because countries are formed to have cohesive societies under a cohesive culture. And actually, would it be much more positive and much happier for Muslims as a whole group to be united under one shared society where they could effectively live among
Yeah, but it's
people who
not
share their
possible, is my
values?
point. This is my issue with what you're
Well, it
saying.
was not possible today. It might be
Yeah.
possible in like, I don't know,
But what you're talking
20, 30
about,
years.
but the thing is, the statements you made, were you know, you were implying that this is something that individuals should do now, almost, right? I mean, I noted it down here, so yeah,
Well, I
so
said it in
you're
an
free to have
off-color
your
way, of course, but
yeah,
yeah.
yes. Do you see the distaste though, the kind of irony in the statement?
Not really. I think it more is that effectively, again, as I mentioned, it's more that I just think that Muslims would genuinely be happier and enjoy living around people who share their values and
Mm,
seeing it actually as a positive thing in the same way, because it's very difficult. Like if we look, for example, at things like the English Defense League,
mm.
there's clearly a level of we have these two groups of people who are just very unhappy, and a potential solution to
Sorry, I just have to pause there a bit because I don't. Two groups of people that are clearly unhappy.
well, unhappy living together, really.
I mean, I'm a Muslim. I grew up here in England. I wouldn't say I'm unhappy living here, you know.
No, not yourself, but again, I'm speaking, for example, regarding, say, if we look at, say, Tommy Robinson and English Defense League
Mm,
versus, say,
mm.
some of the Islamic fundamentalists, like, say, Ali Dawah, for
But
instance,
these are
they're two
okay.
groups who are clearly
I
unhappy
don't
with
agree
each
with that.
other.
Okay. Yeah,
Well, they're two groups that are clearly unhappy with each other, are
yeah,
clearly unable to see eye to eye.
yeah.
And
Yes.
one potential solution, which I effectively was trying to broker, is
Mm.
that a solution to that could be rather than having these two cultures warring with each other, having them respect each other peacefully in separate, cohesive societies. That's really my overall point, really.
Right.
And obviously,
Yeah. Sorry. Go
yeah,
on.
I don't think that can be implemented now. It was more of a sense of perhaps one day in the future that could be a way to solve that so that we don't effectively contribute to the erasure of anyone's population, really, because we shouldn't want to erase the English, nor should we want to erase Muslims. We should effectively say no, we can respect your differences but keep them separate, and that can be a way for people to be more cohesive, because unfortunately most people in the UK don't want this to be a majority Islamic country,
Mm.
and this problem is not going to be
It's
solved.
just strange what you're saying here.
Why is it
I am
strange?
struggling to pinpoint it ever so slightly, but it's strange what
Why
you're
is it
saying. So
strange?
I'll tell you what it is. I'll try and articulate this as best as I can. Maybe I'm a bit all over the place, so I apologize for those watching. And if you can pull out my argument better for me, or do a better job, please
Yeah,
do.
absolutely. Of course.
So you firstly, so you've taken Islamic fundamentalists, sorry, and you put Ali Dawah in that category. Personally, I don't put him in there, but anyway. And then what you're saying is this group here will be better off elsewhere, but then you're talking about all Muslims will be better off elsewhere. When you talk about separating for the sake of argument, right, for simplifying this argument, Muslims and non-Muslims in England, right, those who have real contentions are not the majority of English-born people, or in terms of lineage, and not the majority of Muslims. They don't have major issues. As I say, as a Muslim born in Britain and so on, I don't have issues day to day. Really, I'm quite comfortable here. I'm quite accustomed to life here. So the groups you're picking at are, I would say, a minority, and in the fundamental Islamic Muslim fundamental case, a minority of a minority. To then say take these two groups, move them away. Who are you talking about in a real sense in the real world in England? Who are you referring to? What group? Who?
Well, would you like for the United Kingdom to become under Sharia law? Do you think Sharia law would be good for the
I'm
UK?
happy to answer that question, but I don't think that's relevant at this moment.
Well,
And it's not a yes or no
no,
answer.
it's
That's
just
the
a
thing.
sincere
Yeah,
question.
yeah, yeah. Please note it down, and I'm happy to answer. But I feel like we'll go into a different topic if we sort of speak on that. Did you
Well,
understand
the
my
only reason
question?
I
I
asked
might have
that,
just articulated
well,
it
the
badly.
reason, no, 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 the only reason I asked that was because
Yeah.
effectively the reason why I asked that was because you mentioned that a lot of people in the UK might not necessarily agree with that. However, the majority of the people in the UK, the majority of the non-Islamic population in the UK would not be comfortable with Sharia law becoming part of
Yeah.
the UK because it
Yeah.
fundamentally is, again, it's the incompatible, the
Okay.
cultural incompatibility.
Right. Yeah, but that would never happen unless there was a majority of Muslims, in which case it would be democratic, a vote in, wouldn't it? Which would
Well,
be in
yes,
line with.
effectively, in the same way, in exactly the same way that, say, in Saudi Arabia, if the majority of if Saudi Arabia became a liberal democratic society, a
Mm.
secular liberal society, then it would effectively end up that being the majority.
So from a liberal paradigm, and I don't know a whole lot about politics and whatnot and philosophy. So I'm a noob, if that's the right term in that, yeah. So if I slip up, do tell me. Um, what's the issue with that? What is the issue if most people in Saudi became atheists? And from your principles as a liberal, right?
Well, don't you think it
If we're
would be a
talking,
shame that that would be kind of erasing the native Islamic population? Because if the native population of Saudi
no, but it's
Arabia is
natural though, isn't
Islamic,
it?
well, no, it shouldn't be. See, my general argument is it shouldn't be natural to erase a native population. I actually think it would be quite a shame to erase the culture that is already there, because if the people of Saudi Arabia already have
We're
their
talking
worldview,
law specifically, we're not necessarily
well,
culture and
laws
customs. There's a slight difference, I
do
think.
typically change. I mean, for example, if we look at the French Revolution,
Mm.
that was obviously a natural political evolution in terms of things happening. And laws do change,
Yeah,
politics do change. That is a natural evolution thing. I
yeah,
guess it depends on what you define as natural evolution, really, because people's ideas do change. As we mentioned earlier, the United Kingdom used to be a Christian country
yeah.
and is now a
Do you think it's a
obviously a
shame
much
that
more
it
liberal
changed then?
Western country.
Do you think it's
Well,
a
I don't
shame that
think
it
it's a
changed?
shame. I see it as a
There's a
natural social
contradiction in what you're
progress and
saying.
evolution.
But there's a massive contradiction
Well,
in what
not
you've just
really,
said then.
because it hasn't the native English population hasn't been erased, they've evolved. So it's kind of the whole thing of, you could say, revolution versus evolution. So for example,
Right.
there'd be a difference
I
between
understand.
a big group of people going to Saudi Arabia and saying, let's change everything and implement these new laws, versus the people of Saudi Arabia naturally deciding that they wanted their ideals to already shift. It's almost the difference between somebody coming out and wanting to
Right, like
change something
migration
versus the people,
opposed
yes,
to.
exactly, versus the people that are already changing their ideas. Does
Okay,
that make
so there's
sense?
yes, it does. I see your point now. Um, all right, okay, fine.
Mhm.
Let's say as Muslims do move into the UK and it continues to happen, and so do Christians and atheists and whatever. And there's many reverts. Often you hear people saying that Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world and so on. Let's say it's not due to migration. Let's say 51% are Muslim now due to part migration and also English, British, white people becoming Muslim and electing, someone, and they've 51% and they've chosen the Sharia. Would you take issue with that?
Well, no, but again, I don't think that would happen
So what's the
because
fear then?
most people,
What's the issue
well,
if you
again,
don't
it's
think
an
it would happen?
issue because it's not something which, for example, if we look at, say, the fact that Christianity already came and implemented a new regime which was erasing the previous, say, Celtic paganistic, Norse, early polytheistic ideals, of which I'm very interested in, by the way.
Okay.
And because Christianity, like Islam, is a Abrahamic religion,
Mm.
it spreads, it's said to, part of the scripture is say to spread it. And that is something which most non-Christian or non-Muslim people do take issue with. Atheists such as Christopher Hitchens spoke out against this. And I think that, to broker back to my point earlier, one solution which I've personally considered is, rather than say, okay, we want to say spread this around. Let's say all the people who want to practice this can live in one country, and then people who are interested in that can then go and potentially learn about it. But we don't actually have it so that we say the entire world should become Christian or the entire world should become
Mm.
Muslim. Not that,
Mm.
of course, all Christians or Muslims want that to be the case, but that is
Mm.
something which I have again sort of thought with this whole idea of having cohesive society so that we don't actually have, because I do
These
think as well, I
clashes,
mean, well, yeah,
whatever clashes there
clashes, and
may be.
also this whole idea of like totalism of one world government, one
Mm.
religion, one God. Because where's the fun in that? Where's the diversity in that?
Right, I
Matt,
see,
like,
yeah.
where's the diversity if we
I see your point.
say we have everything's just under one thing? Like, that's not really a diverse world, is it? That's why we have varying cultures. That's why we have varying countries. That's why we have varying ideologies. And that's also why we have varying religions. Well, I mean, there's so many religions that we don't even know about, really.
Yeah, okay, I see your point. I think I've understood it better. So
Yes, exactly.
just
Thank
to
you for
wrap that,
listening as well.
yeah, no, it's been interesting. Just to wrap that point up then, and I'll ask the same question again, just for clarity. So if the UK, right, if people accepted Islam in the masses and 51% became Muslim, they elected someone and democratically in a liberal social contract theory, all of this sense, right? Via all these principles, they wanted Sharia law for themselves. Would you be against that? Would you say this is wrong in the way that you're against uh, Sharia law in England in a migration sense? Would you then class it
Well,
as
no, of
evolution?
course, if
The English people
any,
have evolved.
well, yes, I would class it as evolution if it was something which people had come to determine of their own free will. Whether
Okay,
or not I would want to personally continue living under that would be
sure.
another issue
Yeah,
entirely.
I'm sure
But
it is. Yeah, from what you've
of
said.
course, it
Yeah.
would be a form of natural social evolution,
Okay.
um, because natural social evolution does come from things evolving. But we do have to also understand, ask ourselves, to what extent is it evolution versus people being necessarily led into thinking a certain way.
Mm,
And it's kind of the whole thing of like, if we all think this is a certain way versus we're all being led to think this is a certain way. And I guess that's also where I take some issue as well when I get Muslims saying Islam is the solution, because
mm,
that to me does come across as a little bit totalistic. And I think that, well, no, Islam is the solution for some people. It's not
mm,
necessarily the solution for all people. And that is why, again, I think that out of respect to those
mm.
who are, say, Muslims and those who are non-Muslims,
Yeah.
having this sense of you have your way, I have my way. As for the right your way, doesn't really exist. That's where I do think the ideal would. Because again, we shouldn't, what kind of world would we be living in if we wanted the whole world to follow under one ideology? I mean, you've got right now, I mean, that's also one of the reasons why I really hate feminism and this cultural Marxist ideology, because feminism really wants everywhere to follow this ideology. They believe that everywhere women are oppressed by this patriarchy, which basically means that you as a man have like no say, basically. I mean, feminists literally believe that you are a villain, which is just so awful. And it's this idea that all men are perpetrators of this patriarchy,
Yeah.
and that is just so messed up, man. So that's really where I think it's this whole issue with wanting to impose this very totalistic worldview effectively.
Yeah. And so I'd just like to add to that. I don't think most Muslims are trying to enforce, Sharia
No,
law
I
in
don't think so
Islam.
either.
Yeah.
I don't think so either at all. I think
Yeah.
most Muslims are very peaceful, laid back people, and it really is just a misunderstanding, really.
Yeah. So we've gone into a bit there, but I don't know. Are you okay for time and so on? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
It's very, very interesting.
Um, so just to mix in the final statement you made in that
Mm-hmm.
video with the overall topic, which we're already into, really, Islam versus Western culture. You said Islam shames sexuality and attraction. I have to massively disagree with you there. And I think you perhaps name this as one of the clashes between Islam and Western values. Would you say? Is that fair?
Oh, absolutely. Well, my general
And can you
argument, which
explain
I've
if
put
so?
forward, yes, absolutely. Well, I've effectively put forward this argument in my videos and elaborated on this regarding the Abrahamic religions. I think again that because the entire setup of the Dawa debate was not really like, I really appreciate the fact that you're actually asking me to clarify my views. It's
Mm.
really, really quite nice. So I do appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, no,
But
you are.
effectively, the problem with Dawa was that I felt like I didn't really get a chance to explain myself. So first of all, of course, Islam does not shame sex. What
Okay.
effectively I was getting at was that in the Abrahamic religions, sex outside of marriage is considered immoral, and that is something which
Mm.
I take very high issue with, as I do not personally believe that sex outside of
It's
marriage is immoral,
outside
and
of a
that is very much
contract,
a
right? If you put it in liberal
yes. So
terms, it's
that is
outside of a
a
contract of an agreement.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, and that is something which I do take issue with, as I generally don't believe that we should and I think that is a big clash, not just with Islam, but with Christianity, Judaism as well, that
Mm.
they effectively view sex outside of a marital contract as being immoral, as being
Mm.
sinful. And many say people who have the more, say, liberal mindsets towards sex
Mm.
believe that we should treat sex as a form of pleasure, as a form of intimacy, that we should not view sex outside of
Those two
marriage as
things,
immoral,
yeah.
as
Okay.
say, that we shouldn't view sex outside of marriage as immoral, that we shouldn't necessarily call women sluts for the amount of sexual partners that they've had or whatever, that we shouldn't say that, you know, men are pigs for finding women attractive. I actually took an issue when Ali Darwar mentioned in the video how he used to go clubbing and he used to just see women as things. I actually found that
That's
very,
his problem,
very
isn't it? Yeah.
well, it is. That's what I was saying, because the thing is, plenty of men can have, you know, casual sex with women and still treat the women as people. Like, there's nothing to
Yeah.
say that a man can't have sex with women and still say this is a human being. You know what I mean? And, you know, it hasn't been
Right.
my experience. I don't, you know what I
I
mean? So
think the
that's really what I
point,
was getting at.
yeah, I think the point he's trying to make, and I'm with the point that I think he was trying to make. Again, if he wasn't, you know, if I mean, I doubt he'd have watched this, but I don't want to assume he was saying something else. But anyway, the point I would make, if I can correct him or add to it, is on the mass, it causes more issue for a society. Maybe an individual can, like it's like alcohol. Again, an individual might be able to control their level of alcohol intake and make sure it's just sort of beneficial or so on. But as a society, it's almost too strong and too many people succumb to the negative influences. And overall, societally, it has a negative effect, is my belief.
Well, I
On
actually
alcohol and
agree that excessive, well, I
yeah.
agree that excessive promiscuity actually it is actually negative for society. And that's what I've also
Mm,
found a bit ironic, because I completely agree that, you know, having partaken in that kind of lifestyle myself, that's everybody just having sex with whomever they want is actually very negative. However, I don't personally see the solutions telling everybody, right, only have sex with people you're married to. I simply see
mm,
the solution as, well, let's actually change the way we view sex and start to view sex in a more effectively viewing sex as a form of bonding. So not
mm.
necessarily saying I have to sign a contract with somebody to have sex, just
But
saying
you
that.
do though, you do though. When you sleep with someone, you do sign a contract with them. It might be verbal. You tell them what you don't want, what you're okay with, what you're not okay with, and so on. There
Sure,
is a
but is it
verbal
necessarily the
contract.
same? Sure, that's
It's
obviously something
similar. It's
different to the
similar.
marital contract.
It's
Well, it's obviously different considering how marriage, you know, you are effectively pledging to spend the rest of your life with that person. So it's not really the same thing. I understand
well,
what you
there's
mean. It's a
divorce.
verbal
There is also
agreement.
divorce.
Well, yeah, but effectively, you know, I mean, we do, you know, when two people get married, they're pledging to spend the rest of their lives together. It's not really the same thing, effectively. In terms
No,
of
no.
verbal consent,
I'm
you're
trying to draw parallels
completely
in
right
your
on that.
sorry, I missed that last bit.
Oh no, I was saying, yeah, no, you are right, of course, about it being a verbal contract. Yes.
Yeah. What I'm trying to do is I having listened to as I've mentioned some of your content. I don't think your views are too dissimilar from Islamic views. To be honest, I don't know if you might
Well, they're
find that
somewhere between the Abrahamic views and the liberal views. That's really my whole thing. It's kind of a
hmm,
whole middle ground thing. And I
because
think there's probably a lot of people in the UK who would probably feel, or in the West in general, who would probably feel quite similar towards that.
so you mentioned right being too sexually promiscuous. You said. That you may perhaps you engage in it at some point. I don't know how exactly you describe that or quantify it. I'm not asking you to describe anything personal, by the way. But where do you draw the line? Is my question.
What I meant effectively is that I do think that excessive sexual promiscuity is unhealthy. We could say, for example, having sex with people recreationally to a high extent, to the point where sex becomes a recreational activity as opposed to a form of bonding. So when I say a form of bonding, I mean as in two people meet, say they like each other, they have sex, it's very natural, then they form a relationship, or maybe it's a friendship or something. That versus just having lots and lots of random hookups with people on Tinder and one night stands. I do think that the main problem I have really is, again, this is really coming from experience, is that when we
Mm,
take all the vulnerability out of sex, we actually say that sex effectively becomes meaningless. I do think this is actually very unhealthy. And I do think that you know, with our generation, a lot of the kind of excessive, you know, Tinder culture, hookup culture, one night stand culture is actually quite unhealthy. And my solution, my personal, I don't say the solution, but my general personal idea, because again, a lot of
Okay.
what I'm saying is my view of the world. Nobody has to agree with me. It's really just my own personal view. You know, I don't try to say anyone has to think the way I think. It's really just my own personal view, coming from a very, you know, non-religious, non-political, anything standpoint. Just, you know, thinking the way I'm thinking is
Yeah.
that one potential solution is we start to treat sex as a, what I was saying to him is I think sex should be a bonding experience. I think that sex should be not necessarily about only for marriage, or you can just sleep with whoever we want, but sex can be necessarily more of a, you know, two people sharing an experience. And the reason why I think that could be a positive solution is because a lot of, say, young people in the West who are not religious might take issue with the whole concept of no sex before marriage, but they actually might find the whole concept of sex as a bonding experience to be a more positive middle ground between the two, say, maybe not necessarily extremes, but two separate poles of the diagram. The pole of the excessive, overly liberal, casual sex versus the no sex before marriage ideal as portrayed in the Judaic religions. So that's really what I was trying to say. And I can see why, you know, you as a Muslim or any Christian would disagree with that. But I can also see why a lot of atheist or non-religious people who do take issue with the hookup culture, but don't necessarily just want to wait till marriage, might actually find what I'm saying to be quite helpful and to be quite a positive middle ground solution, and something which could be potentially quite a good way for
Mm.
people to because really, you know, the sexual revolution as well of the 1960s was a social reaction to Christianity, because
Right.
Christianity effectively, a lot of these women did highlight a genuine problem about how they felt that, you know, they were being told, you know, you got to be a virgin, good girl till marriage or whatever.
Yeah.
And they were
Yeah.
kind of rebelling against that. And, you know, it's these things usually, revolutions, evolutions, big social changes usually come about because of a sense of collective frustration in
Mm.
the collective
Society.
conscious.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, so there's usually that sense of frustration that comes about in the collective conscious, and that is what then brokers into these kind of changes effectively.
So it really is a hypothesis you have based on sort of anecdotal
Yeah, it's
accounts.
really just me thinking my own way. It's not really me thinking that things have to be like this or like that. It's just a kind of personal ideas, really.
Yeah. Okay. Can I just throw in a short question in there? Do you
Sure.
think, just based on our previous conversation, do you think people with sort of opposite views or opposing views, those who are Christian, those who are super liberal in terms of the sexuality and the hookup culture, do you think it would be better for you guys to separate and live in different countries?
Well, yes, absolutely. That's really why I don't think it would make sense, because I think that Christians
Yeah.
and, you know, people with
But
very
also the
strong
hard
Christian
liberals
views.
who
Well,
disagree
yeah,
with you.
because there isn't really a way for people to find a middle ground, and I think that that is kind of that's just the way I see it. I don't think that
But
that's
you're
not
not
me
creating
saying
your
trying
own
to be
middle
nasty to
ground though.
people.
You because you've got these liberal there are these liberal views like let's
Well, I
just
do think a lot of
simplify
liberals
it.
would probably agree with me, actually. They probably
Yeah.
find a lot of agreement. In fact, they'd probably be the ones who are most closely aligned with, really, in many
The
things.
point I was trying to make is how deep and how many sort of slices do you split a society and community of people into?
Oh, that is a fair point. I mean, it really, see, again,
You're not
it's
going to
really
agree with your
like,
parents on certain things. Should you go and live somewhere else?
yeah, of course. I think, again, it's less about the minute details and more about what the overall macro thing is. And again,
Mm,
if we come back to the point, say radical, well, say evangelical Christians and
yeah.
hardcore liberals are not going to agree. That's why in the USA, for example, there are certain states which are more Christian and certain
Mm,
states which are more liberal, because they have different views and they end up having more cohesion. You know, that's why we also have the Bible Belt, which is where they're the more kind of Christian based parts of the country. So that is also kind of one example of people living separately. It's not even necessarily saying completely different countries so much
yeah.
as
Yeah. Yeah.
different, because there is something to be said for, perhaps in the UK, actually mentioned this earlier, like, you know, we can't just say kick out all the Muslims. Perhaps a much simpler solution would be in the UK, we say this is a designated area for, say, this is where the majority of Muslims
I
live.
don't
This
think
is
that
a
would go
designated
well.
area for where well, why not? It might actually be
I
quite a
think for
positive thing,
so many reasons it wouldn't work.
designated
I
area
just
for
think it's
Muslims,
not
designated
practical.
area for
Yeah.
Christians, designated area for liberals, designated area
Mm.
for conservatives. I think it's very practical. I think that actually might be a very positive solution
Do you
because
think
that way
it's
you have people
yeah?
living among people who think the way they think, who want to follow the values they want to value,
Well,
who
who's
want
in
to think the
power?
way they do. Well, I mean, if you have, say, local elections, say local elective councils,
What
that
if the
could.
yeah? I
So,
was
for
gonna say,
example, what
what
if?
if the locals don't believe in democracy?
Well, for example, what if, say,
You're still
Ali
imposing your
Dawah.
views on them, aren't
Well,
you?
no. Well, what effectively, for example, let's say if, say, I don't know, we decided that Birmingham was going to become
Birmingham of all places.
well,
It's funny. It's funny. It's just funny.
stereotypes. But
Yeah, yeah. I
what if
grew up
Birmingham
there, so
decided to be
yeah,
like Little Islam and Ali Dawah
yeah.
became
It
the
already
council?
is. Yeah.
And there, all Muslims in the UK could all live together in Birmingham, could all
Mm.
be, able to could all have mosques there, could go to prayer there, and could still obviously go and visit other parts of the city. Other
But they
people would come in
wouldn't. Well, you
there,
wouldn't, though, would you?
but
Because they would just you'd have. It would be us v them on both sides.
no, not
I think
necessarily.
it
Not
would.
if
I
you
think it would.
not
Yeah.
if you had but don't you see how misanthropic that is? Not if you had a sense of mutual respect. Because see, this is where we end up from despising cultures to
Yeah.
appreciating cultures. Because for example, if we had, and this is also where I think that we end up with a lot of this unhappiness, it's that
Mm.
if we actually want to respect people's cultures,
Mm.
more respect can come if the cultures are actually being, say, strong and united, but not. For example, what's a good example is the Maasai tribes, right? The Maasai tribes
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
you know, they obviously live together. They're one tribe. People can go and visit, but they're not bothering anyone else, And this is where I do think that this could be a potential solution. It's that rather than saying everybody mix, we have this is your thing, your thing, your thing, your thing, your thing, and we can still, we can appreciate the differences. We can see what we do like for example, I appreciate a lot of Christian art. I think that Catholic churches are very beautiful. I've been to, Spain, Italy. I've seen the Christian architecture there, and it's gorgeous. And I really do think that that could be a potential solution. I do think that, I mean, probably because nobody's really saying this. This is again just me thinking this as an idea. It's not like a popular idea. It's just an idea which I've thought of. There's probably other people who probably consider this too, but it's an idea I've thought of as a way for us to, rather than trying to step on each other's toes, respect each other's differences. I mean, we have different houses. You have your house, I have my house, and
Mm.
we can go to somebody else's house, appreciate their house, but not necessarily want to live there, but still be respectful of their house. You know what I'm saying? That makes sense.
Yeah. I think. Yeah. I think it's too. There's just way too much to go into that one. I personally don't think that would work. At face value, you do.
Maybe not now.
Which
Maybe in
is
like
fine.
10, 15 years.
Yeah, I
It's
don't see it. I don't see it. I'll be honest. But
just a potential solution. It's just a potential solution.
no,
That's it.
it's good. Look, it's good to throw out ideas out there and speak about them because that's the only way you get anywhere, isn't it? So I think to talk about things is a start for sure. You mentioned some of the positives about Islam, which I'd like to briefly touch upon because
Mm-hmm.
clearly, for anyone who thinks you are anti-Islam, just to make that clear that you're not. You spoke about the positives of prayer, attending mosque and so on, cleanliness, general
Yeah.
conduct, and so on.
Yeah. I'm
You
more anti, you could say, Islamism,
right,
if want of a better term.
right. You mentioned blessing Allah. Is that just typo?
Probably, yeah.
Probably okay. Yeah. I just wanted to check in case you've misunderstood something or whatnot as well. Uh, and then the negatives you mentioned. So I think it's always good to highlight uh, an area of agreement. So to almost set the tone of there's no sort of innate hatred or dogma. Sort of against each other. You mentioned Sharia law, jihad, and so on.
Yeah.
So, very general question, but it's a general term that you're referring to there when you have done so. Where and what do you understand of them? Where are the areas that you take issue with regards to the two?
So it's my understanding that in, we'll say, more radical tenets of Islam,
Mm.
there is two forms of jihad. One being the spreading on teaching it upon others, which is where it effectively is spreading onto other societies, and the other, which is the violent form of jihad, which is effectively the use of violence to force people to convert to Islam, which is effectively what
Right,
terrorist groups like Al Qaeda and the Boko Haram use. I think
right.
that most Muslims would agree that that's pretty terrible, right? You know, that putting a gun to somebody's head and telling them, if you don't convert to Islam, I'll shoot you is pretty
Or
bad,
even
right?
if the individual said they're Muslim, we wouldn't. This again, just a disclaimer. I'm not really studied or whatever. If I, everyone, please do your own research. I'm not trying to tell you exactly what Islam is and isn't. These are the beliefs that I have and that I've been taught and learned. And I also just to caveat that it's not a runaway technique. I do believe them to be quite mainstream. So if you disagree, please do say. Uh, yeah. So there's a verse in the Quran which is that translates to there's no compulsion in religion. So if someone was to put a gun to your head and say accept Islam, it doesn't really. You can say you're Muslim, but only God knows if you're truly Muslim. So it's almost you're shooting yourself in the foot if you're trying to force someone to accept Islam. There's no such thing, in a sense, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. So you would say that generally speaking, putting a gun is saying, if you don't convert to this religion, I will kill you is wrong, effectively.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I don't know how
Yeah.
to phrase that either. I mean, it's
So
absolutely
that's
pointless in every
really, you
sense of
could
the word
say
for
that's really
people.
the
Yeah.
only, that's probably one of the few issues, because I think I read a good chunk of the Quran, and basically every surah, it seems to like include terms like slay the unbelievers, slay the
Now
infidels.
you have to qualify what you're saying slightly because Sorry, did you say you read a few chunks
Well, I
and
read
every
about a third of
verse,
it.
a third
I
of
mean,
the
it
whole
was
Quran?
kind of in every, I know there's many translations of the Quran, but there are many phrases which do say slay the unbelievers. Now, I have actually heard, and I'm aware that, and many have spoken about this, that the Quran was written during a time of war, and
Mm.
people actually speak about it being
So
more about
various time
context, if
periods. Yeah.
that's true.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
and that's effectively, it was effectively used during a time of war, if that's
Mm.
correct or not.
Yes, some of the verses, yeah. I mean, it's contextual for sure. Like you can't
Yeah.
just, you can't open a physics book and say, "Oh, this will apply here," and I'll jump off a building and fly. It's not going to work. Like, do you know what I mean? It's contextual,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but just to clarify what you said there, so you've read a third of the Quran, or a third of
About a third
what?
of it, yeah.
Okay, and you found almost every other verse to speak about violence.
Well, there was a lot of language which I did perceive as violent, yes.
Okay, uh, can you expand on that?
Sure. So again, for example, there were many, as mentioned, there were many lines which stated effectively that Allah is the one true God, that those who do not accept Allah. So effectively, it mentions frequently that Allah is merciful, but it also frequently says that if you do not accept Allah, that you should be slain. And that's something which I obviously took a lot of issue with,
That you
as the
should
way
be
I see it, the
slain.
way
Uh,
slain, a lot of verses regarding, murder, killing the infidels, killing the non-believers, slay the non-believers, slaying the infidels. I think that that's what perhaps somebody who has not necessarily looked at the context behind it could potentially perceive that as being quite uh, violent and fascistic. I know, of course, it's not necessarily the entire
yeah,
message behind the book, but that is what somebody who is perhaps not as well educated could
yeah.
perceive that as being. They could perceive that as being rather antagonistic. And I think
Mm,
this is where perhaps some of the confusion comes, is when some, say, non-Muslims
mm.
see that and they become afraid and they think, oh no, these Muslims are all violent and they all want to kill us. When we, of course, know
Well, you'd
that is
all be dead if that
true.
was the case.
Well, we'd all be dead, and also we know, of course, that's not true.
Mm.
We know that's not true, but
It
we
would be
do. This
unfair.
is what.
Sorry, it would be unfair of me to ask you for quotations for obvious reasons. But we'll have to move on because I mean you're not going to have quotations, and I doubt. Unless you do, I doubt references, recurring
Well, no, I mean, I
stories.
do have a copy of the Quran right there. could like read them out, but I don't know. I mean, is that necessary, or is that just
It's no. My
pointless?
point is, I don't. I firstly, just as a first point, I don't think it's nowhere near as frequent. I think violent passages, see, or for the sake of argument, let's use the term violent passages, right? Whether it's just or not is a different conversation because self-defense is self-defense as well. Um, I do not think they're as reoccurring or frequent as it seems like you've kind of alluded to in sort of the last few sentences.
It could also just be a misinterpretation as well. People can definitely misinterpret things.
Mm.
Um, as we mentioned as well, it was written during a time of war, and context does matter effectively.
Yeah, okay, fine. Let's conclude that bit there. But I do want to emphasize maybe sort of going over again, or I can send you some stuff if you want. I definitely think the frequency is important because this is what scares people,
I mean,
right?
I read once there's about 109 different lines or 109 different verses where slaying unbelievers is mentioned. And I think that's some of the things which maybe not necessarily myself, but perhaps others might take issue with.
Hmm. But how many verses are there in total?
I'm not sure about how many verses, but I read
Well,
on a website which effectively discusses the Quran that mentions about 109 specific verses where
hmm.
the slaying of the unbelievers is mentioned.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So I think we've agreed. One, it's contextual, right? If we talk, I mean, if would we disagree with killing active members of ISIS?
Well, no, of course not, but that's different. I mean, they're
No, but
genuinely
it's a context,
terrorists.
right? No, but it's a con. But yeah, so
Yeah,
that's the context.
yeah, of course.
Us. So what I'm saying is the Quran has to be taken in its context also. That's that's
Yes, of
my
course.
that's my my overarching point here. One, two. I think it's important that, and this is why I don't want to talk on this because I don't know enough,
Of course. No, me
and
neither.
I'm not going to because it's important to be representative. You know, when you say 109 verses, exactly how many verses are? How much are we talking as a percentage? You could say that someone who has no idea, they might think the Quran is a book that thick or whatever, and they might think, you know, oh, sorry, a small, let's say, pamphlet, or whatever. I don't know. It's taking things again out of perspective. It's like they might think this is 90% of a book. It's nowhere near the case. It's generally the Quran is not talking about so-called sort of violence and so on.
No, of
You
course.
see
There's
my
a lot
point?
in there as well about, of course, how Allah is merciful to practicing Muslims, how
Mm,
Allah is, blesses practicing Muslims and says, all practicing Muslims who follow the Quran are,
yeah,
you know, what, protected by Allah, for Allah is merciful to those who follow the religion, etc., etc. So there is that sense of it as well, of course.
yeah, yeah. I'm just actually Google, so it's over 6,000. So if we're looking at that as a percentage, it's quite small, and that's not my argument sort of against those. But I just think it's very important because it can be, and I don't think you're doing this, but it can be used as a scare tactic to repeat the same sort of thing out of
Well,
context.
that's my point, really, is that
Yeah,
I think that that's where those who effectively do perhaps critique Islam or perhaps are fearful of Islam, that's what they see and they perceive that as a way that's fearful. And that's where a lot of
yeah.
the kind of fear ends up coming
This
about
this
because
is
they see these and
yeah.
that's what makes
Sorry,
them
yeah.
uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I heard a lot of this from someone you mentioned, Tommy Robinson. I don't know if
Yeah.
I think, are you a Tommy Robinson supporter, right?
Well, I support when he was I first of all I support free speech and I support the fact that he was speaking out against things like grooming gangs
Mm,
and the fact that he was also speaking out against, we'll say, what I would perceive as Islamism, as opposed to Muslims wanting to just go to mosque and pray and practice Ramadan. And also, again, about, say, the rise of, Islam potentially becoming majority religion in the UK, which we all know obviously is not going to happen.
yeah,
So that's really what it is. Would I say I'm a fan 100%? I mean, I respect his courage. That doesn't mean I necessarily agree with everything he says.
mm,
I respect J.K. Rowling's courage for speaking
yeah,
out against trans activism. However, I
mm,
also think her views on feminism are, I completely disagree with her views on feminism. So it's really less about that and more the fact that I really respect the fact that he was speaking out against certain things that,
yeah.
yeah.
the reason I bring him up is because he's someone who I found to just repeat the same so-called violent passages and disregard the other 6,000 or however many verses there are, and that's just as bad in my opinion. It's like a fear-mongering tactic, and it's not. It's just dishonest.
I suppose it's sort of taking a small thing and maybe making that to be the entire thing.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I think. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I had one final sort of topic, if it's okay with yourself, time wise again. With regards to a lot of what we've spoken to, and I really do appreciate your time, and I apologize if it's sort of rambled and whatnot. Hopefully, it's edited okay and whatnot.
Not so.
The principles that you talk about, you mentioned the Palestine thing about evil, the term evil, violence, good and bad, our views, their views. Where do you derive these from?
Sorry?
Okay, the deeper question is, do you believe in objective morality?
I would like to say yes, because there are some things which are genuinely unforgivable. So, for example, unjustified murder is obviously unforgivable. Rape, molesting children. I think we can all agree that these are fundamentally immoral. I think we can all agree on these.
I do believe they are, but I mean, if you take slavery as an example, right, we will say slavery is unacceptable, but if you went back not too long ago, it was okay, wasn't it? So,
absolutely, yeah.
So how do you sort of
well, the thing is, it wasn't really okay, was it? I mean, just because it was practiced doesn't mean it was okay.
Societal standards, wasn't it?
Well, it was. It's not really that it was perceived as okay, because as well, for example, speaking specifically just about the transatlantic slave trade, I mean, that was only practiced by, it was only a very small minority of Americans who owned slaves, usually white, upper middle class Americans, and a very small percentage of them who owned slaves. So,
or let's say homosexuality, for example. Would we agree? It was illegal at a certain point, right? Again, not so long ago.
Well, that's why, actually, when you asked me that question, I was hesitant, because there would have been a time when I would have said no. The reason being is that because, as you're saying, our morals do generally tend to change as society. Like, for example, in 100 years, everybody might say that eating meat is unacceptable.
So what's your answer then? Do you think it's subjective or not? And where do you take it from? Where does it come from? This is where I would feel
no, it's lost. A very interesting question. Yeah. I think that we specifically derive our morals from our levels of abilities to empathize with one another. So, for example, if you and I both saw a baby being slaughtered in front of us, we probably both elicit a very strong negative emotional reaction in us because of our ability to empathize with the baby, regardless of our political, spiritual, religious beliefs, whatever. We both look at that and say that's bad. And this is really the thing, isn't it? It's like this whole thing is
it's all very subjective, I think.
Well, it is subjective, but then it's also like, well, do you draw the line? Because effectively, if everyone just has their own subjective idea of right and wrong, but then doesn't that mean that we can just, say, okay, let's just kill these people, let's go and bomb this society, let's go and bomb this and do that. You know what I mean? That's where things get a bit tricky.
Well, that's exactly my point. So, in terms of everything we've spoken about, and the words good and bad have been used so many times. How can you really say that something is good and bad?
No, it's a very good question. It's a question which I'm not quite sure I have the answer to, really. I think it's a question which we as humans have been trying to answer for the last since we walked on the earth. But I don't know. What do you think about it? Do you think there's objective morality?
Yeah, well, it's the Muslim position or the Islamic position that I will take. So I don't know if
Yeah.
generally, I'm sure you're aware.
Well, yeah, the
Humans were
Islamic
created
position is
in this.
effectively yes, right? Yeah, yes,
Yeah, yeah,
similar to
yes, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's
Judaic. Yeah,
God created God. It's not a person or whatever. There is a creator. He's implemented. She, however you want to go about it. I've implemented. I have made it such that there are certain principles to abide by naturally. And we believe that humans are born with what we call a fitra, which is like a innate sort of disposition. So when you say, to people, if they saw a baby crying, we would say, well, this is as a result of a natural disposition that everyone has.
yeah.
Basically, yeah. But it's really, I'm not a debater or anything like that. I really don't want people to think that's what I'm trying to do or making myself out to be. I'm just interested in conversation and learning and challenging my own thoughts in doing so, which I thank you for entertaining today as well. But the recurring sort of point that I find is this, and I always find people to struggle with it. Like, I don't want to bring out. I will actually. Let's just do it because if people are watching, they've been watching for a while. So, if I could push you a bit, if you don't mind.
Oh.
Yeah. So, homosexuality, you don't take any moral issues with.
No, not at all.
Yeah. So if there were like incest, would you have any issues with that? Do you think it's sorry? Not would you have any? Do you think it's morally?
No, that's an
Okay.
interesting question, and I think the problem with incest is that it can lead to people creating a child who is genetically abnormal.
Okay, what
That's
about
really
two
the
brothers?
problem.
Two brothers.
Well, that's also a form of incest, isn't it? Like,
Yeah,
so.
but you wouldn't create a child on this point.
Well, it's very interesting, isn't it? Because I know this is going to sound extremely controversial.
Sure, yeah.
Personally, I would take the classically liberal position on that, which is two consenting adults, out of sight, out of mind, keep it away from mainstream society.
Oh, why though? Why keep it away from mainstream society?
Well, because we should not be encouraging that sort of behavior because the results can be, as I mentioned, the results can be genetic
No, but it's two
abnormalities, not to
brothers, though, isn't it?
mention.
It's two men
Well,
or
it's
two women.
still, well, it's not really about whether they're men or women. It's about the fact they're related. And because as well, there's something known as, I can't remember the term of it, but there's actually a specific reason why people are, how shall I say, uncomfortable with family members. Because I think when we're young, we become desensitized to we're desensitized to seeing our family members in sexual ways. And it's actually something whereby two twins, if they're separated at birth and they come to see each other again, I can't remember the term of it. I don't know if it's genetic sexual attraction, I believe it is. But yeah, effectively genetic sexual attraction, which is when two people who are say related, they can develop a sexual attraction to each other if they don't grow up around together. And the reason why we find that so repulsive is because when we are young, we grow up around our family members. We're actually desensitized to seeing that. So yeah, I mean, obviously I think incest is absolutely disgusting because like most people think incest is disgusting because we are typically wired to, from when we are young, see our family members as in a non-sexual way because there's the risk
but why
that
should
if
we be?
procreate,
My point.
well, it's because again,
Is it? I mean, you could argue that
that
it's
if we
because of
procreate
society.
with them, well, society, the funny thing is that society tends to function based on our biology. And the fear there is that, again, if you have two people who effectively brother and sister.
No, let's stick with brother. No, the reason I mentioned male and female, male and male, and female, is because it eliminates the reproduction issue that is mentioned.
It does.
or father and son.
Yeah, I guess you could say it's less of an issue.
But
Is
there's
it
no
still absolutely
reproduction issue.
disgusting? Yes. The reason why it's disgusting is because we are biologically wired to view our family members as people we are related to, not people we are sexually drawn to. There's actually also, if you think about it as well, when people are young, so obviously men and women are typically, attracted to each other, but when we're young, say people who tend to say grow up around each other as childhood friends
Mm.
tend to kind of not see each other in the same way because there's that sense of being desensitized. It's almost like seeing somebody as a family member versus seeing someone as a sexual potential, if that makes sense.
I'm not.
So,
I kind of follow, but also I don't think you're making a case against it, really.
well, I'm not really making a case for or against it. I'm simply trying to, I guess,
But I
explore it
would
in my
argue
mind.
your principles currently, from what I've understood, you're kind of contradicting them. If people aren't harming anyone, if the liberal position essentially, there's no harm
Well,
factor,
yeah, I
or it's
am kind of
consenting.
taking a liberal position on that sense, really. Yeah, I suppose,
No, but you're
because
still saying it's
with
wrong.
two brothers, well, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying I find it repulsive because
Yeah,
biologically speaking, I'm wired to find it repulsive. But finding something repulsive, like for example, there are people who are sexually attracted to being pissed on or shit
yeah,
on. It's
yeah,
not immoral. It's fucking disgusting to me, to
yeah.
maybe you, to a lot of maybe to you it's fucking great. I don't know. But
No, yeah,
hope you don't
no
mind me
comment.
cussing, by the way. Um,
It's fine.
but uh yeah, effectively there's a difference between seeing, because also I would argue as well that two brothers wanting to have a shag is a lot less immoral than killing babies or blowing up countries. You know what I mean?
Based on
I mean,
what?
that's also
Based on
whereby with the whole homosexual stuff. Well, first of all, two men wanting to privately have a shag away from society is not going to lead to social damage if, as long as it's not something which we say, okay. I mean, this is also actually it's an interesting point regarding all the LGBT stuff because,
yeah,
for
this
example,
I'm interested.
there's a lot of people who are against because I'm very pro, well, not pro, but I'm very supportive of homosexuality. I actually write romance. I've written several romance novels which are about like gay men. So I got no problem with homosexuality. I think the issue is, if
Hmm.
which a lot of people who might be against homosexuality have, is what people do in private versus making it a public thing. So, for
Yes.
example, I
Okay.
think a lot of people, I mean, maybe even yourself, would
Yeah.
say if two men want to have a relationship and it's private and it's their lives, or two women want to have a relationship, it's private, it's their lives, as long as they're not trying to say the whole society should become like this,
Here's the
that's
irony in your positions. Yeah,
what's
I'm
ironic.
saying this from a like caring place. As far as I understood and heard, that's the same as a Sharia law position. If two men do something in the house, you can't come and stone them, to take extremes. Islam would not condemn an individual to death who has slept with another man in his own house in private, or a woman, or.
Well, that's a misconception then, because the way I perceived it is that according to Sharia law,
Yeah,
two men
it's
who,
very
who
much
have
public
sex
and
should be
private.
murdered.
Say that again, sorry. Apologize.
Well, perhaps that was a misconception on my part, because my understanding of Sharia law is that under Sharia law, two men who have a sexual relationship should be stoned to death.
Well, there has to be witnesses. Number one, there's a system for it. Uh, I mean, if a man, okay, so Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, I don't know if you heard of him, but people listening, maybe if you refer to him, he spoke about if man caught if a man caught his wife in bed with another man, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and did something or took it to court, right? Firstly, he needs to have witness penetration. Number one. Two, he needs X amount of witnesses and evidence. Otherwise, it can be thrown out as slanderous against this woman, and the punishment for slander is quite severe as well. A woman's honor, speaking about a woman as if she's a Western trash or whatever, whoever's been saying whatever they've been saying. So I think um, I think some of your positions are much closer to Sharia law than you might sort of perceive them to be.
Well, I wouldn't say that a man should be stoned to death for having sex with another man regardless. I don't perceive that as something which requires someone to be stoned to
No,
death.
but it's
The
interesting.
Bible says
The difference in the
the same
public,
thing as well.
the difference statement, the difference, the differentiation, sorry, you made about something being done in public and in private is a, I would say, a fundamental principle in Sharia as well. What two people do in private is their business. What people come out and do and try and influence the masses, if you will, those two situations are not treated the same, and that is exactly what you're highlighting here as well, aren't you? If two brothers did something in private, you said, you know, you take a liberal stance and leave them to it, whatever. But if they came out, then you see that it would be potentially lead to a demise in society, right? That there is very much an Islamic principle as well that you're sharing. I just think it's interesting, you know.
Perhaps it's less of an Islamic principle and more of a
It's in
universal
line.
human principle because
Yeah, okay.
perhaps actually humans have a natural aversion to certain things.
Mm.
And perhaps we fundamentally understand the difference between public matters and private matters. I mean, to be clear as well, I don't have anything against public, like men being in relationships public. I'm actually very like pretty open when it comes to homosexuality.
Mm.
I take issue more with things like the whole transitioning of children. I mean, I
Yeah,
actually know a
it's
couple.
all
I
that's
actually
the same, isn't it?
I have gay male friends who think a
Mm.
lot of this extreme transgender stuff, especially with the children, is absolutely appalling, which is
Yeah,
quite interesting as well. There's a lot of gay and lesbians who are against we'll say they're against the T in the LGB. So
right. Mm.
so those are the things really. You could say again it's less of an Islamic principle and more of a universal human principle because just the fact that a Muslim and a non-Muslim
Regardless, they align. Regardless is my point. Regardless of who,
maybe they
the two
align
are there, but
because
they align.
they're universally incompatible with our humanity,
Mm.
and it's the
But
fact that
it's fundamental. It's a big point. It's a big point to make because if you're taking massive issues with Sharia law and how it's an enforcement and all of this, well, in principle, you agree with how it's enforced, not what is done, but you agree that in public matters that uh, that people see may lead to the demise of society. You feel that this is different to what an individual does at home, and what I'm saying is it's not a small trivial point of agreement. It's a big point of agreement, I believe. Yeah.
I'm sure it's a big point of agreement. I mean, my general critique of Sharia law is if we look at the effects of, say, women who are treated in, say, countries like Iran, women who have specifically fled
Yeah,
certain
but
regimes.
you mentioned earlier, someone said, and most will agree, that you won't really find a Muslim country that is implementing Sharia law. Or I mean,
They're
what even is Sharia law
implementing,
is
we
the
could
other
say
question.
they're implementing
Some kind of
regime.
cultural,
We
yeah.
could say, I mean, we could say they're implementing regimes which are shall we say, not necessarily positive for the people living in those countries.
Hmm.
Like, for example,
For the
how
majority,
women who are,
it's
yeah, we
because it's
could
about
say, for
majority. But
example, the fact that if women are fleeing from countries where they're effectively being, beaten by their husbands or stoned to death or whatever, I mean, we could even say maybe that's a misinterpretation of certain things. Maybe that's
mm,
taking certain things to the extreme. Maybe that's where we have things like the Taliban and
mm.
the ISIS
Well, I
and
think,
some would say, well, maybe that's
yeah,
less about the ideology, more about the people. I don't know. That depends on which school of thought you go with.
right, yeah. Yeah, I see your point. It's a big mess if we look at it in terms
Oh,
of
it is a big
specific
mess.
countries, because obviously
Yeah.
there's invasions and so on that have taken place over decades. So destabilization of countries and whatnot. So there's a lot of yeah. So I tend not to go into specific countries and so on like this because it becomes really tricky and almost political, right? And kind of which side of history you stand on and whatnot. But it's the moral thing, the moral relativism is a big one for me. But I think shall we wrap it up there? I know the time is going,
Yeah, we can
and I've
do.
taken
This
up
has
a
been
lot
an
of your time.
absolute no, this has been brilliant. It's been very, very interesting.
Yeah. Sorry if I've
I like
blabbered
the
so much,
fact
but
that we
I kind of
no, you haven't. I like the fact that we, despite our disagreements, we're able to see where we align on things. And I wish things could be more like this, you know, man. Because as you mentioned, we probably do agree on things more. And the way I see it is
I think we do.
because, well, it's more down to our universal humanity. I mean, let's say if we took away the labels, for instance, we both pretty much agree that like killing people is wrong, some things should be private, and certain things are not necessarily good for the stability of society. And despite you being a practicing Muslim and me being a non-Muslim, we're still able to see those agreements. And I would argue that comes down to our basic humanity. And what
Yeah,
I
I would
find so
argue
interesting is that
it's a disposition that we've been given by God, but either or, we're at the same conclusion.
we are at the same conclusion. I find it really interesting how every week I've been going to Speaker's Corner saying feminism is trash, men and women should be united and complementary and work together. And everyone, Muslim, Christian, atheist, religious, people all standing there. It doesn't matter whether someone's religious or not. What I'm saying are just basic universal human principles. And that's really the stance that I represent when it comes down to it. I don't represent anything other than universal human rights. You know, that's all I really believe in, really. That's why I don't believe in any religion or politics. I just believe in universal human rights.
Yeah, but
In
you've
the
run
most
into
basic
this problem
sense.
of moral relativism, which I don't
Well,
really
moral
see.
relativism is complicated,
Yeah.
yes.
So you'll have to work through that. But listen, let's do maybe a part two at some point if you're up for it. I know
Oh, I'd love to.
we didn't
That could
speak
be
about
cool.
feminism, so not properly really.
No, we can do a part two. I mean, I
We'll
speak
do it at
about
some point.
feminism all the bloody time, so
Just
it's
shout
nice to
out your
talk about
stuff.
something else.
I'll put your link below.
But
I'll put
thank you. I
your
really appreciate this, you know, man, and especially after the whole Dawa thing. I mean, again, we didn't properly go into the second video, you know, I just got pretty. The
yeah, but
main
it's
thing I was
emotions. I
pissed,
don't think
well, I
it's
was
fair.
pissed off about the
Yeah,
thumbnail. That's really what
yeah,
I was pissed off about. I was pissed off
yeah.
about the thumbnail. I thought that at the end of the day, it's his business. It's his business. He can do what he likes. And I don't want to I think it's best if we don't necessarily engage with each other, you know. That's really how I think it should be.
Well, if you get an opportunity, speak to this Mohammed Hijabi. He's someone I admire quite a lot, and he's
Yeah,
very more sort of rational. I feel, or he's just better in
I'm sure he would be, yeah.
his hikmah, like wisdom.
Yeah.
Yeah, like in how he speaks to people and stuff. So yeah, awesome. So I'll put your link below. I'm gonna edit this and whatnot, just so it's cohesive or coherent. Sorry. And you don't have Instagram or anything, do you?
No, I don't really
It's
like
just
so
YouTube.
much
So,
social media. Yeah.
so people can search your name, go to your channel, and search you on Speakers Corner as well, in terms of just your name and Speakers Corner and so on.
Yes, I'm there every week. But yeah, I talk about feminism on my channel, The Rational Female. I also have an author channel, Zarinas Mature Author. And yeah, to everyone watching, I'm not a trashy Western woman. I'm just a normal girl who
Not at
writes
all.
books.
Awesome. Thank you. It
Thank you
was
so
great
much,
speaking to
Omar.
you.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll do a part two hopefully at some point.
We will. Okay.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.